Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Woman Who Would Be King, The Madusa Story, by Debrah Miceli and Greg Oliver. Forward by Paul Heyman, narrated by Debrah Miceli. Dedicated to my mom, who absolutely hates the thought of this book. To my father, a man that never knew I existed. To the family and friends that stuck around not wanting a thing. To careers that nearly killed me emotionally, financially, and spiritually. To my fans, past, present, and future, you truly are my energy to continue. To all of those that are lost, may they be found and heard. Most of all, to love, patience, and spiritual healing for helping me always find a way. Forward. The first time I ever met Madusa was in July 1987. We had both just been hired by Vern Gagne's Minneapolis, Minnesota-based American Wrestling Association, AWA, which at the time aired nationally on ESPN. While the promotion had already enjoyed its glory days, it was one of the big three promotions in the United States, and its championship was recognized around the world. Getting picked up by the AWA meant you were now working for the big league promotion. I was 21 years old, and I was making both friends and enemies at record pace. One of the people I knew from my days as a teenage photographer was Curt Hennig, then the AWA's world heavyweight champion and a sensational performer who would find greater fame just a few years later as Mr. Perfect with World Wrestling Entertainment, WWE. Curt was a second-generation professional wrestler, and his father, Larry the Axe Hennig, had a love-hate relationship with the Gagnes for years. As soon as I got to the AWA, Curt and I started to conspire on how we could get Vern to allow us to work together. The newly minted villainous heavyweight champion and the loudmouth manager from New York seemed like, all puns intended, a perfect combination. On the days we would tape interviews, promos, in Minneapolis, Curt and I could always be found huddled in a corner watching everyone else do their shtick, taking notes and figuring out how to top every single one of them. At the time, the top female performer in the AWA was their women's champion and sometimes ringside manager Sherry Martel, and it was no secret Sherry needed new people to work with. Vern finally hired a Minneapolis-based talent named Madusa Miceli. This was quite the controversial decision, since Madusa was trained by Eddie Sharkey, a longtime rival of the Gagnes, but whose training camp had already produced the Road Warriors, the last big box office attraction the Gagne promotion got to enjoy. Madusa was different from the get-go. She had the blonde hair and the great looks, but from the moment she walked into the room, you knew this was not some powder puff who learned how to take bumps. This was a fighter, a legit athlete, a badass, someone to be reckoned with, and someone whose ideas about women in the business were not limited to either special attraction women's match or valet. Madusa walked in determined to be an equal talent to anyone, male or female, and she wanted to compete with them for the top spot, even if it meant competing with me for the top manager spot or competing with Curt Hennig for the position of being the #1 wrestler in the promotion. Now, 35 years later, the listener will most likely say, "Sounds right to me." But in 1987, the concept of a female competing with men for the top spot and a manager, let alone wrestler in this business, was not even part of the conversation in the professional wrestling sports entertainment industry. Madusa was not only beyond ambitious, but also she was indescribably ahead of her time. Madusa arrived already at odds with Sherry Martel, who did not like the forward-thinking vision Madusa had no desire to hide. And Martel had zero desire to partake in a storyline in which Madusa would wind up the AWA Women's Champion. Sherry, super popular with everyone in the locker room, was headed for the WWE. And Madusa, the new girl on the block, trained by local tough guy Eddie Sharkey, with the reputation of working local Midwest indies for $5 a night, just to get the experience necessary to break into the big leagues, was facing a situation where the rest of the talent in the locker room wasn't going to be welcoming. In case you're wondering, Madusa couldn't have cared less. She walked into the Gagne's office, production facility in Minneapolis, with her chin up and her chest out, squared-shouldered and fists clenched, a smile on her face that let you know this was not only a strikingly good-looking woman, but also a confident one. Kurt decided to have some fun and introduce himself to her and see what all the fuss was about. As he went to talk with her, I was summoned to do an interview promoting our next event in Las Vegas, Nevada, or Green Bay, Wisconsin, or Denver, Colorado, or wherever else the AWA was running an event featuring the talent I was managing at the time. As soon as my interview was over, I darted over to Kurt and couldn't wait for their scouting report. "So, how was your first encounter? Is she cool? Is she nice? Does she know anything about the business? Tell me." Kurt Ever, the practical joker, Ribber, said, "You gotta meet her. She's great." So I straightened my tie, popped a breath mint into my mouth, and walked over to her, with my hand extended for our initial handshake greeting. "Hi," I squeaked. "My name is Paul Heyman. People call me Paulie Dangerously. It's a pleasure to meet you." Madusa shook my hand harder than most men ever had up until that point in my life, looked me straight in the eye and said, "I'm Debrah. People call me Madusa. Don't fuck with me." She didn't let go of my hand. She made sure that eye contact lasted long enough for me to know just how deadly serious she was. Then she broke into a slight grin as if to say, "I think you got the message right," let my hand go, and walked away. I left the AWA at the end of 1987, and Madusa was out the door not too long after I was. I bounced around a little bit until landing at the Ted Turner-owned World Championship Wrestling promotion, while Madusa went out to Asia, and not only honed her craft, but also developed a reputation as one of the single toughest females in or out of the pro wrestling business. So it was a no-brainer in 1991 when Dusty Rhodes, Jim Ross, Jr., Jim Crockett, and I were putting together a new horseman-like faction called the Dangerous Alliance. I wanted someone in the group who would play a role that had never been attempted before. We needed a James Bond villain, and that heel would be known as the Director of Covert Operations. There was only one person for the job, Madusa. Dusty knew she could be a revolutionary, indeed an evolutionary, talent. JR loved the idea before I even finished pitching it. Crockett, who wasn't all that familiar with her work, asked, "What's she like?" "She's too talented for her own good," I told Crockett. At one time, the #2 promoter in the United States behind Vince McMahon and the owner of the promotion, Ted Turner, bought and rechristened World Championship Wrestling. "She's got great camera presence, a boatload of charisma, can help us fight our way back to the locker room in case of a riot, can credibly wrestle anyone, male or female, if we want her to, and can take much better bumps and beatings than I can." Dusty, JR, and Crockett heard all they had to hear. Madusa was going to be the Director of Covert Operations for a faction that included top star of the day, Ravishing Rick Rude, and the hottest prospect in the entire industry, Steve Austin, along with their frothing-at-the-mouth manager, Paulie Dangerously. I should tell you, I'm not much of a drinker, and I especially don't like beer. But when you're sitting with Dusty Rhodes, and he wants you to have a cold one with him, you oblige the American dream. So when Dusty reached into his cooler and passed around some Coors Lights, I knew I was going to down one out of respect for WCW's lead writer, then known as a booker. "Here's to Madusa," Dusty exclaimed as we all raised our beer cans for a toast to the decision made and the talent who just got cast in a major career opportunity, the Director of Covert Operations. Dusty guzzled his beer, looked at me, watched me force the beer down my throat, and laughed. "She's going to be a major star, Paulie, and she's got you and me, the American dream, the super genius, to thank for it." "Yes, sir," I replied. "There's just one thing. "Tell me, kid," Dusty stated. "Don't hold back. What do I need to know?" I straightened out my tie, popped in a breath mint, leaned into Dusty as close as I could get to whisper in his ear, and told him, "She's Madusa, the director of covert operations for the Dangerous Alliance. Don't fuck with her." Paul Heyman, July 2022. Introduction. Being in the public eye for all of my adult life has been both fulfilling and exhausting. The fans have backed and supported me to the top of two remarkably similar industries. In professional wrestling, I hit the pinnacles both in the United States and in Japan. Then, in one of the most abrupt left turns in history, I entered the testosterone-fueled chaos of monster trucks, taking 2 world championships away from the good old boys. Through the process, I traveled the world a couple times over, finding fame and incredible pain in Australia. Those who clamored for autographs after the matches or waited patiently to talk with me in 5-hour-long lines at the Monster Jam pit parties thought they knew me a little bit. Maybe they called me by my real name instead of Madusa, or Alundra Blayze, mentioned my Minnesota upbringing, or brought me a Butterfinger candy bar. Little girls and boys wore their pink tutus, tiaras, and Queen of Carnage t-shirts, and gave me tight hugs and said they wanted to follow in my footsteps. I smiled, laughed, and played nice, but none of them knew me. They didn't know the depths of despair I faced growing up. Poverty was one thing, but at the extremes, I craved love and attention from a mother unable to give it, and I was sexually abused by the man I had been told was my father. They didn't understand my fight-or-flight instinct that makes up my very core, an ongoing battle. And they certainly never knew of my continual heartbreak, my failure. I wanted to be a mom, something I never had myself, really, desperately. In 2 male-dominated sports, pregnancy was frowned upon. But I tried. Lord, how I tried. 2 separate tubal pregnancies nearly killed me. 3 IVFs didn't work. I miscarried a few times and had an adoption fall apart at the last minute. It tortures me now, and talking about my inability to be a mother openly for the first time for this book has not helped. Nothing will ever help. Instead, I do what I have always done, throw myself into my work. I cannot sit still, or I think too much about it all. I have overcome the bumps of the ring and track and have evolved. Whether it's public speaking or private life coaching sessions, I aim to make a difference. I've adapted and can game with the best of them on Twitch, share on social media, and come up with ideas for products labeled with the Madusa name, keeping the brand alive. The title of this book, The Woman Who Would Be King, came from Paul Heyman, and it fits. I blazed and blazed trails, created controversy, defied gender rules, tossed convention, and a title belt, into the trash. I never settled, and nor should you. I have been working on my autobiography, on and off, for 30 years. This book is very much like I am. It jumps around like a caffeinated bunny, with the attention span of a kindergartner, who always wants to touch, taste, experience life to its fullest. Listen with an open mind, and imagine yourself in some of the same positions I was in, having some of the same experiences. Let's share this journey, of course, with a warning label. This is a story of a girl who experienced life's tragedies and triumphs. There are people I celebrate here, some I vilify, and some whose names have been removed for a variety of reasons. With great trepidation, letting down my guard for the first time, I invite you to listen. I suspect it will cause the end of some personal and professional relationships for me, maybe even get me canceled in today's overly sensitive society. So get over yourself, let your hair down, and enjoy the wild ride. It's time for you to get to know the real Debrah Ann Bergman. Chapter 1. Granny. One of the most important people in my life has been my motorcycle-riding, tough-as-nails granny, Violet Lewandowski. With her long jet black hair, comfortable, stylish homemade clothes, and mischievous twinkle in her eye, she was the antithesis of your traditional old lady grandma. Even when her hair finally turned gray in the 1990s, she acted decades younger. Since my mother was a mess, I got dropped off at Granny Vi's a lot, and she never failed to keep me occupied. She lived in Robbinsdale, Minnesota, only about 15 minutes away where we lived, first in Minneapolis and then in Crystal. Granny always made reference to my non-stop energy and stubbornness. Darla was the cousin closest in age to me, and we'd often be together at Granny's. One time Darla locked me outside, and I warned her I'd smash the window on the screen door to get in. And I did. Granny had been working in the basement and came up to bandage me up. I still have a small scar on my right wrist, one of many fond memories of Darla. We didn't know it until we were much older, but Darla and I had similar issues with our parents. Often, Granny and I would head to a nearby ballroom in two-step, and she'd swing me around like she knew I needed a break from my mother. My first plane ride as a 15-year-old kid was with Granny. She wanted to go to the Grand Ole Opry, and no one else wanted to go, so I said I would. We saw Mel Tillis, Minnie Pearl, and even rode the roller coasters and the Ferris wheel. What a memory. Her work ethic is one of her traits that I admired and aspired to match. Granny always had 2 or 3 jobs going. I can still picture her in her assigned blue dress at the Red Owl grocery store, her hair done up in a bouffant, sneaking me a treat when I'd pop by. For 19 years she worked as a maintenance supervisor, looking after 6 different buildings in Brooklyn Center. How many women do you think had similar jobs at that time? Granny also cleaned houses on the side. And did I mention she also had 7 kids? Divorced when the youngest was 2. As I got older, Granny was the one to help me out. She loaned me money for modeling school and for a knee operation I needed early in my wrestling career. And most importantly, when my second marriage fell apart, she was there to introduce me to my one true love, my pink Harley. I'm done. My life's a mess. I need a bike. Well, it's about time. I was wondering what took you so long. Grandma, I was in Japan. As she approaches 100 years young, Granny is still working, sewing for people, upholstering, just making an extra buck on the side. For all the love I have for Granny, the truth is that she was a big part of the lies, the deceptions, the half-truths that scarred me and cannot get off scot-free. My whole life, I was told that Granny, whose maiden name is Pocklington, was part of Native American, from the Potawatomi tribe. She dressed the part. The family decided to send away for information on our background through the 23andMe genetic testing. There wasn't a drop of Native American blood in her, but some of the names listed sounded right, and there was a lot of English blood. She didn't know how to explain it. Well, I did. She lied, based on misinformation, and in comparison to some of what you are about to learn, it was a little white lie. My maternal grandfather, who divorced Granny when I was young, insisted that his side of the family had Jewish origins. Unlike Granny, he looked the part of an older Jewish man, but everyone else denied it. The genetic test showed deep roots in Europe. Right from the get-go, lies and cover-ups were a part of my life. Yet, I love her and my family. I would do anything for them, despite all that was wrong, all the cover-ups, all the denials. In retrospect, it's not a surprise that I ended up in colorful professions where I could pretend I was someone else for a little while. Chapter 2. Lessons Learned, Still Learning. Some people aren't meant to be in school. Back then, I was one of them. Everything I needed to learn was out there in the real world. Experiences meant way more to me than learning the periodic table or who was the 18th American president. And I was smart. Too smart. Give me a test. Fuck, I ain't doing it. I could just pass in a heartbeat. And I didn't have to study, except math, which I refused to do. Every grade just kept passing me. And they shouldn't have, because I didn't do the assignments. I suspect they did it to both get rid of me and because they knew I could do the work if I wanted. Consider my track record. Expelled from school in kindergarten and again in 7th grade, and in 9th grade, multiple suspensions. Dropped out of high school at the start of 11th grade, modeling school where I quickly learned I was unable to deal with rejection. Then my second nursing training ended in mid-course. But one school did stick, and it was as unconventional as they come, training to be a professional wrestler. There was a rich history of wrestling in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, both amateur but especially professional, where a veteran wrestler named Vern Gagne had set up a promotion based in town that promoted throughout the Midwest and as far away as Las Vegas and San Francisco. But I was oblivious to that. While I was a girl who loved to have a good time, I was also pretty serious about my gym time. There were days I would teach 3 or 4 aerobic classes, and I never studied to be an instructor either. They just let me lead the classes on top of hitting the weights. In the summer of 1984, I was at a beach bar in Minnetonka, a suburb of Minneapolis. It wasn't Venice Beach, but it was our place to hang out and show off. I had run into an old friend named Jenny, and we were all playing volleyball. I had only recently moved back from Chicago, Illinois, where I managed a health club. She introduced me to her boyfriend, Kai Michelson. We chatted, and I learned Kai was a stuntman and a stunt coordinator with extensive major movie experience, including working with the legendary stuntman Dar Robinson, who made Burt Reynolds look so great in so many films. Kai was upfront and told me that I belonged in the entertainment industry. With my look and personality, I'd be a success. He was my Imagineer. Normally, I'd take that over-the-top buttering up as a come on, but Jenny was right there. I dreamed of life in Hollywood, moving from stunts to an action star. Later, I got a brief taste of it through the connections of Brandon Pender. Then Kai broke it to me. He meant professional wrestling. At that time, I had never watched wrestling. I never had interest in wrestling, and had barely caught a few minutes of it on television. I thought he meant mud wrestling. Kai had a pal named Eddie Sharkey, who operated a wrestling training facility. We arranged to meet down at Sharkey's place. I'll never forget walking in. It was like a dungeon, with old high school gymnastic mats all over, and a bunch of sweaty guys throwing one another around. Eddie and Kai chatted for a bit. They'd known each other for years, and Eddie was up front with me. "Hey, kid, if you're serious about this, you're going to have to train with the rest here. No different." "Yeah, I can do this," I replied. With that, my life changed. It was $2,000 to train, but Eddie owed Kai a favor, so I was never charged. I also wasn't paid to wrestle in shows for a couple of years either. Kai took a percentage of my pay as a de facto personal manager, but that never amounted to much. Really, I caught a break getting in with Sharkey, who had shown the ropes to future superstars like the Road Warriors, Rick Rude, Barry Darsow, who wrestled as Repo Man, Crusher Khrushchev, and Smash in Demolition, Nord the Barbarian, and Jesse the Body Ventura, who would later become governor of Minnesota. I'd often find myself in the gym, owned by the Road Warriors, and connected to Zubaz. With these local guys, when they were home, especially at the gym on the outskirts of town, Ventura liked to work out on the exercise bike and would share stories of his days in the military and from his early wrestling days. Eddie was always funny, cutting dirty jokes. He was a good trainer, but very old school. If I wasn't pairing up with the one other girl, I have no idea whatever happened to Daniel Moore, who competed as Wrestling Rose. I would be rolling around with the guys during the evening classes a couple times a week. A few others would come and go, and no one from my class ever really made it in pro wrestling. Less than 2 months later, I was in a bar fighting, and it was such a huge rush. I wore the same leotards I'd wear at the gym, and had on a pair of old worn-in red Reeboks and my 1980s puffy socks. I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. It showed. I knew I was supposed to tell a story, but I didn't know how long to keep someone in a hold or when the big comeback should be. That stuff wasn't taught. I also wasn't taught that wrestling was a work, meaning you had to work together for the best performance so that you didn't really hurt each other. I learned that over time, listening and paying close attention to the guys in the ring. Right from the start, I was Madusa. Kai and I came up with the idea one day at his cosmetic warehouse. Later, we figured out that it was M-A-D in the USA, M-A-D-E in the USA. But that wasn't the thought at the beginning. Brilliantly, I trademarked the name Madusa, and it's been in my control ever since. Maybe I was always meant to beat people up, or later destroy cars. There was a lot bottled up in me, so much of it tied up in the craziness that I experienced at home, not knowing what normal life was like. I was just lost and didn't understand why I felt that way. We were poor, so I had one strike against me just walking in the door. The other kids could tell, like I smelled of welfare. There was a target on my back from the moment I went to the bus stop by myself for the trip to school at Twin Lakes Kindergarten. All of the other parents were there, hugging their sons and daughters goodbye. Not mine. 5 years old, and I'm on my own. The bully soon noticed what easy pickings I was, and I'd hide in the bushes waiting for the bus. It didn't work, as they kicked and punched with the baton, but it created a toughness in me. In the schoolyard, I would try to make myself scarce. The anger built as I was picked on. When you needed to go to the bathroom, you'd have to grab a block attached to a piece of yarn. One time, kids were pushing me out the door, and from another classroom, there was a dorky kid being pushed out. They started in, teasing us that we were boyfriend and girlfriend. I had enough, and I swung the bathroom block and hit the other kid in the forehead. It split him right open, and he fell, blood gushing everywhere. "See what you did?" I screamed, and then I continued to the toilet. When I came out, the teacher took me to the office, where I was promptly expelled because I was sticking up for myself. That ability to stand up for what I believed in served me well through the years. How disinterested was my mom? I call her Betty and will throughout the book, since she was hardly a mother. In my schooling, I didn't go back to kindergarten, so sat out a year and entered first grade at Kavanaugh Elementary. More on Betty to come. The fighting continued, and lessons learned. I was the one beating up kids at the bus stop. I tried desperately to make friends, but then something would happen, and we'd end up in a fight, and the other parents would prevent their kids from hanging out with me. It didn't matter. I'd fight anyway, boys or girls, no matter their size. My first grade teacher looked like a witch and did not like me. One day she stopped me from going to recess, and I became so angry that I sat at my desk and I wet my pants. When the witch returned, she took me to another room and spanked me. When she finished, I just turned to her and said, "Are you done?" That really shocked her. She expected me to cry. Then I got my things and I went home. In second grade, I mellowed out somewhat and had a reasonable year. The main reason for this was my teacher, who looked like a perfect doll with an angelic face. She became a surrogate mom, and I wanted to please her, so I behaved. By third grade, I was probably the biggest girl in the class and the most picked on in the school. There was another kid who was also my competition for being victim number one in the school, Eugene. Sex education classes were just starting after years of public controversy in the state of Minnesota, and kids had been given forms for parental signatures, and Betty refused to sign mine. So when these classes started, there I was, with Dork Eugene, our desks moved to the hallway. It was really humiliating, and the embarrassment contributed to my attitude problems. Fortunately, in the 5th and 6th grades, I had teachers who cared, and my marks started to improve. I also gained some confidence selling books of fundraising vouchers in grade school. There were prizes, simple things like a stuffed animal radio, but I craved the recognition and thrived on the competition. I learned a lot about entrepreneurship and how to work the system and money, and all in a good way. Since I had no parental supervision, I could stay out later at night, knocking on doors, making sales, asking for 50 cents or $1. Counting the money was exciting, since we never had money around the house. Similarly, I had no problem hitting up people for work. Mowing yards or shoveling driveways for pocket money, and shoveling snow.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?